Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today, I have the lovely Sarah Mayo on the show. I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly there, Sarah Mayo. Good morning to you, Sarah.
Good morning, Julian. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
No, it's good to have you. And you are the co-founder of POINT3 Wellbeing, which is all about helping people stress less and smile more, which I love that strap behind. Absolutely brilliant. And your particular interest in mindset, movement, and mindfulness for managing mental as well as overall health and well-being. And we are going to be talking about burnout today, and we're going to get a little bit personal about it. So, but before we go there, Sarah, I'd love to know, what do you love about what you do?
Oh, so many things, Julian. I think in one word, it feels really nourishing. And I'll expand on that a little bit. It's my favourite word of the moment. It feels, it's so onomatopoeic, first and foremost. But yeah, I've been reflecting on this generally at the moment because we're about to celebrate our 5th year of running the business, of running Point3.
Well done. Excellent.
Thank you. So of course, have been reflecting on what it is that I love. And I think we set up the business in the first instance to bring a bit more balance into our own lives, and we will talk about burnout shortly. But also not only to bring balance to our own lives, but also to help others bring balance into their lives, because life is incredibly stressful. You don't know what curveball is going to be thrown at you day to day. And that's hence the sort of the strapline, our mission, if you like, stress less and smile more. It is a balancing act, because we're not here to demonize stress, not at all. You know, we really do recognize the need to have the right amount of stress, you know, and I can feel it at the moment, a little bit of adrenaline being on the podcast, and a bit of cortisol coursing through. And that is good in short doses because it helps us to focus. But we need to become a bit more stress aware, because there is a tipping point, and that's why it's all about balance and becoming a bit more aware and a bit more sort of accountable. And that was our mission 5 years ago, to help people stress less and smile more. And whilst the business has evolved naturally, our mission hasn't, and it feels really rewarding, really nourishing, to use that word, to be helping ourselves, yes, but also to be helping others. And I get to do that with 2 people that I'm really fond of. You know, they were friends that I met at a previous job, and we're still friends to this day, but we're also colleagues and co-founders together running a business. So yeah, we're excited about what the next 5 years holds for us. And it's not always easy. You know, we talk about this word balance. It can be quite elusive, and it is a balancing act, and it's sometimes really hard, and we sometimes have to remind ourselves and to pause and go, okay, look, we need to practice what we preach, and check in with each other. And that's what's really nice about our team, is that we are super supportive, and we have the same passion and mission.
Yeah, and I love your passion for it, and it really does show. And that word nourish, I think there's so much in that, and we could really just explore that in itself, what that means, and that would help lots of people. But yeah, I love that word nourish. It's so I don't know, just so powerful. We are looking at burnout, but why are we looking at burnout? I mean, I've looked at some data from some sort of report from NeuroWorks, and just some facts which are pretty stark, really. That the majority of adults feel stressed every month. 1 in 5 British workers feel stressed more days a month than they don't, which I think is quite scary. And almost half of UK employees are close to burnout. So, you know, these are realities of what's happening out there, and people have done these surveys, and people are sharing things. Before we get into that, how would you define burnout, and perhaps burnout for you? Because it might mean different things to different people.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, is that burnout is going to be experienced differently for people. It is a spectrum. Whilst burnout isn't recognised by the medical community as a diagnosis, it is considered a syndrome. The World Health Organization describe it as a syndrome. So there is a scale, mild to severe in terms of how a burnout might manifest for people. I will give some of the official definitions. There are a number, and then I'll kind of give my own sort of personal view or personal experience of it. So the term burnout was first coined in the 70s by Freudenberger, and he characterized sort of three key symptoms, as it were. The first was exhaustion, so mental, physical, emotional exhaustion. The second is depersonalization. And the third is sort of a decreased sense of accomplishment in one's work. And actually, it was used to describe people in giving roles, helping roles. So if you think about kind of caring, social workers, medical staff, that kind of thing. But I think we can all recognize it now, those symptoms. It goes beyond just those professions, and actually it goes beyond the workplace too. I think people can relate to it more and more. The best way of describing burnout, or the one that I really relate to the most, is some work from the Nagoski sisters. I don't know if you've come across them. They wrote a book called Burnout. I think it came out a couple of years ago. And Emily and Amelia Nagoski, and they describe burnout as they use a metaphor of a tunnel to describe burnout. And burnout happens when we get stuck in the tunnel, and it happens because we've got hundreds, maybe even thousands of uncompleted stress response cycles. And I found that really kind of fascinating, and I'm sure we'll explore what that actually means in a moment. But essentially, burnout is when we get stuck in the tunnel. We all know that phrase, you can't see the wood for the trees. It's that sense of overwhelm. And for me personally, I think the ways that I have mostly experienced it is through exhaustion, whether that was sort of physical exhaustion, working in the events industry, events and marketing, often long hours over the weekend, back-to-back events, no time to sort of decompress, moving from one event to another, high profile, high pressure. So physical exhaustion that comes with that, but also in other cases, or often maybe the two combined, sort of emotional exhaustion. So and actually those three sort of characteristics that I mentioned at the beginning, that emotional exhaustion can lead to that sort of feeling of decreased sort of sense of accomplishment. And I definitely felt that, that there was at times where, I just couldn't do enough. And I'm a bit of a, we say, recovering perfectionist, and I'm also a people pleaser. So add that into the mix, and it's quite a concoction of emotions going on, which can lead to that sort of exhaustion and just feeling like, oh yeah, empty, I've had enough, not sure where to go next.
I like having the metaphor as a way of describing it, because I think people, our bodies understand metaphors, because there's so much richness in a metaphor. I know we all interpret it slightly differently, but having that sense of being in the middle of a tunnel, being stuck, not seeing the woods for the trees, and that sense. I've never experienced burnout myself personally to that extent. I've probably been on the edge of it at times, but I don't think I've been what I would deem as burnout, as what people describe, what you're describing there. Do you understand what is going on in our bodies and our brains when burnout happens? Do you understand what the sort of psychological, the physiological things are happening when we sort of get to that place when burnout happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and I'm sure this will be sort of for many kind of something that they know a lot about: fight, flight, freeze. So if I use the tunnel metaphor to sort of guide us through that response. So when we enter the tunnel, so it's worth saying, and then I'll reference also the stress response cycle. So the stress response cycle has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning, when we enter that tunnel, when the stress response cycle kind of starts, that's when we're presented with some kind of threat, some kind of danger, some kind of fear. We don't feel safe. In our environment, for our ancestors, that would have been coming face to face with a lion on the savannah. For us, fast forward many hundreds of thousands of years, that's facing an overflowing inbox, an ever-growing to-do list, a challenging conversation with your boss or with a loved one. All those micro through to macro stressors. So, there are many, aren't there, of those macro stressors at the moment. And the point actually to distinguish is the difference between a stressor and stress. So a stressor lands, that's the threat. That's when we enter the tunnel, when the stress response cycle begins. Then we move into the middle of the tunnel, and that's when the physiological things start to happen in the body. That's when we experience fight, flight, or freeze. So adrenaline, cortisol start to flood the body, our blood pressure rises, our heart rate rises to help pump blood and oxygen and glucose around the body to all the key organs. We tighten up. We're preparing to fight or flee the scene, escape that lion. And in short bursts, that can be life-saving first and foremost, but also can focus you in on a problem or a challenge. But what also happens is, we lose that sort of peripheral kind of perspective. So we can't sort of be, working on multiple things at the same time. We lose that ability to be creative. We're focused on the task at hand. For our ancestors in that moment, fight or flight, that's behavioral, isn't it? Where that term comes from. They would have either, fought that lion and then escaped. So that process of fighting or flighting involves movement of the body. So they would complete the stress response cycle. They would get to the end of the tunnel, provided they escape the lion, of course. And that process in itself, and movement is the most powerful way to complete the stress response cycle. That process ends, they get to the light at the end of the tunnel, they arrive home to their tribe, their community, and all those other, cues of safety happen. For us, we get stuck in the tunnel because we fight or flight, doesn't necessarily happen in the same way. We might get a bit more perhaps aggressive, or we might withdraw from a situation, but neither of those require movement. They are sort of emotional responses. So if we don't consciously complete the stress response cycle, we get stuck in the middle of the tunnel. And that's when, chronic stress builds up over time. And that's an important point to make, that burnout takes time to build. It's not something that happens immediately. It's something that builds up over time. And then, it can manifest in, either something more kind of severe from a mental or physical illness perspective. So we need to consciously complete that stress response cycle. And there are lots of ways that we can do that. But the point is that we have to consciously do that, bring thought to that.
That's really helpful. I think people understand that better in terms of what's going on, and I think that's that movement piece, which is why I guess things like physical exercise, movement, getting outside, and helps sort of complete that cycle a little bit. From your own experience, what did you see as the sort of telltale signs that you were stuck in that tunnel and things were not happening, and what happened personally, if you want to share a bit more about what was going on in terms of your behavior and emotional
Mm.
response to things at the time.
Well, I think it's worth saying that I didn't know it at the time. It's only kind of knowing what I know now. So that's the first point, is that often people are in this place, but they don't realize, we kind of normalize feeling like that in a way. And I just want to make another point, actually, that I don't think I made clearly, about the difference between separating the stressor and the stress. So they are two unique things. So the stress response cycle only it doesn't complete when the stressor goes, only when we've flushed out the stress from the body. I hope that makes sense.
Okay.
So essentially, we have more control over it than we might think, in a way. Whilst we don't have a control over the stressor, we have control over the stress. So back to me and my sort of personal experience. I guess I experienced different types. I mentioned before, sort of more physical exhaustion, and when I look back to my career, and it was super exciting, and I got to do really incredible things, and work with really talented people, and go to really exciting places in the world. And in the most part, I really thrived under that. But there were times when it just, got so much that, I almost sort of, I guess, after all that, living in that heightened state of fight or flight, you just physically feel like you've got nothing left to give. And that has a real impact on you. I mean, I was fortunate that from a health point of view, it didn't really go on to develop into anything more severe. It could very well have. But I think it impacted kind of my relationships, my marriage, because I was so focused on work, and if we think about stress, burnout, mental health, the best way of knowing where you are at any point in time is how are you thinking, how are you feeling, how are you behaving. And with the benefit of hindsight, I know that I probably wasn't showing up in the best possible way for myself, or for those, particularly my loved ones, I think, those outside of the workplace, because all my energy was going on work. That was my priority. So that's one thing. The other sort of, then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I can't do events anymore. I need to bring more routine into my life. I want to be at home. I want to, look after myself more, so that I can be in the best place to show up for those around me. The other kind of way that burnout manifested for me was through that sort of emotional exhaustion, and sort of feeling like I wasn't achieving or adding value, no matter how much I did, and the hours or the passion that I brought. And on reflection, I feel that actually probably what was going on is that my work environment wasn't as supportive as it could be. And I think this is a real sort of lesson for leaders and for managers to realize the impact that we have on those around us. And it seems like a really obvious thing to say, but if we think about what the opposite of fight or flight is, or the opposite of that fear or threat at the beginning of the tunnel, the opposite is safety. And if we can create a sort of a bubble of safety for people in the workplace, then when things are challenging, you've got an environment where people can openly share and openly discuss, or feel like they can bring their whole selves, without that fear, there you go, without fear of being discriminated against, penalized, or challenged. So Yeah, I had a couple of instances in my career. I mean, only a couple in quite a long career, 20 years. So I feel really lucky that in the most part, I had really supportive, encouraging managers. But there were two instances where I didn't feel so supported, and I felt like I cared, but I didn't feel like they cared back. And I think it's a simple thing, we can just all be a bit more caring, a bit more kind, and try and put ourselves into the shoes of others. And actually, if I'm being true to what I'm saying here, maybe they had things going on for them, and that meant that they weren't showing up in the best possible way. So again, it goes two ways, but this is all with the benefit of hindsight, knowing what I know now. So those are sort of my experiences.
And with that, I mean, people listening right now who may have a sense that in burnout, they may even be in burnout, they may be sort of categorized themselves in that way. What would be, I suppose, from an employee point of view, someone actually listening there who's employed, what sort of the telltale signs they might be experiencing and they think they could be stuck in that tunnel? And what are the, from a manager's point of view or a leader's point of view, what should we be looking out for in our teams and individuals, and thinking this person has my expression of going over the edge or they seem stuck? What sort of things should we be watching for? Because it's, as you say, it is a two-way thing of we're accountable for ourselves, which is important. It's not all about people watching over us, but actually as a leader, you also accountable for other people as well. And I think it's important to watch out for people as well. So from those two perspectives, what should we look out for personally? And then from a leader's point of view, what should we be watching out in terms of people's behavior, thinking actually they need some time out here or whatever help, support they might need?
Yeah, I think it is being aware of what are the typical symptoms of heightened stress. So how does that manifest for people physically? How does it manifest for people psychologically? How does it manifest for people behaviorally? And so being aware of almost your stress signature. We do an exercise which is getting people to identify their stress signature. So, for example, if I share a few of mine, and by the way, it's not the best look, but it's important to understand these things. So from a physical point of view, I get quite tight in my jaw. I get sort of tense, but I also really feel it in the tummy. I feel that sense of sort of anxiety nerves in my tummy. So that's something we can be aware of. Tune into our bodies. We often feel emotions in our bodies. And we like to describe emotions as data. What's that data telling you, first and foremost? And then psychologically, how does stress manifest? And this is sort of heightened stress. How does that manifest for you psychologically? So, the hallmark of that is excessive worry. The hallmark of sort of heightened stress is excessive worry. You might that might lead to kind of behavioural tells, like are you kind of seeking more reassurance? Is someone that you're managing seeking more assurance? Psychologically, you can become a bit kind of confused, perhaps difficult at making decisions. Behaviorally, you might become a bit more withdrawn, perhaps, from a situation, or a bit more kind of confrontational as well. Think of fight or flight. Behaviorally, I get a bit sort of bossy and impatient. I know, I did say it's not my best look. So being aware of how stress manifests and how it differs person to person is the key. So the first point is awareness in yourself. What is your personal stress signature? How does that impact how you think, feel, and behave? But then it's sharing it with the people that you work with. So if you're a boss, you can be looking out for those tells in your team. And you need to have that sort of safe space, that safe environment, in order to feel able to kind of share which is, quite vulnerable, isn't it?
Mm.
So to be looking out for some of those key traits in the people that you look after.
And when we spot somebody who might be a bit more withdrawn, or in your case, become a bit more bossier, whatever it may be, that slightly out of the normal, consistent behaviour. I guess that's what we're looking for, isn't it? Something that's slightly,
Yeah.
there's a difference here, something's happening. What's the best way of approaching that individual? What's the best way of dealing with that without being telling somebody who's they're stressed, which is not very helpful, I don't think. What things should leaders be doing? And then I guess secondly, how can we, I suppose, help mitigate burnout within our workplace? And that's a massive thing in itself. And I said that's like a 3-hour conversation. But what one thing would really help in an organization to try and reduce the sort of impact of people getting burnout?
Okay, so the first point that you asked about what can you do if you spot someone is struggling perhaps in your team. Yeah, and you're right to say, that the easiest way is to spot key differences in the person's behavior or attitude or personality. If you've created that environment where it's okay for people to talk openly, then that's the important starting point, actually, because then it's not unusual for you to go, look, Julian, I can see you seem to be struggling of late. You've shared your personal stress signature with me. We've had this conversation, and I'm kind of just here to say, do you want to talk? Is there anything I, as your manager, can do to support you? I think it obviously depends on your relationship, but to create that environment where it's okay to be having these conversations and checking in with each other regularly, getting to know each other more on a personal level, so that it's okay to ask if someone is struggling, because it's all part of breaking down the stigma. There is still so much stigma around stress, or people don't want to be seen to be struggling, or that they can't cope. If we can sort of break that down and go, it's part of the human experience to experience stress. No one's perfect. We're all going to experience it at different times in different ways. Let's be just more open about it. And then we can learn to perhaps reframe stress as well and go, okay, well, when we are feeling that, what are we doing to be accountable? Julian, I know you like cold water swimming or showers, because there's evidence to show that can help manage stress or build your resilience towards stress. Check in with someone and go, okay, that's your well-being non-negotiable, that's your good coping strategy. Have you had a cold shower? Or Sarah, you like to get out in the morning and go for a walk before you start your day. Have you been outside? Check in with people. And take a break. Give people permission to take time away from their desk and it doesn't need to be a lot of time. We know that even just a minute of focused breathing can reset the nervous system. So there are lots of really powerful ways that we can complete that stress response cycle quickly in the workplace. I don't know. Have I answered your question, Julian?
You have. What I really like, you said that word, well-being non-negotiable. And I think that just struck a chord with me, and I thought that's really powerful. Where obviously, and I guess this is where, and I guess what we're talking about here is creating an environment where people basically feel psychologically safe. That's what we're creating here.
Yeah.
We know sometimes good stress, as in the right stress, can be helpful to focus people, to sales targets, when all that sort of stuff. That's okay, and it's when it goes beyond that, it's more chronic. But it's the environment of psychological safety where people feel they can contribute, they can learn, they can take risks, they can fail, they can challenge, all that, and share, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's, to me, the crux of creating a place. But what I really liked is that sort of well-being non-negotiable? And just talk me, I guess, is that sort of thing you help organizations get to a place where they share that this is my helps me in my well-being? Talk me, rather than me just assuming, tell me a bit more about that, because I really think I really like that, and I like that the reference where you said to asking somebody, are you doing your well-being non-negotiable? Because it's something they've shared, and it's something that's quite a helpful challenge of accountability there. So please share a bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we love the term well-being non-negotiable, but we also use the language, have you completed your stress cycle today, Sarah? So, they're kind of interchangeable, but the idea with identifying your well-being non-negotiables is taking accountability, because we do need to be accountable day to day. It is our responsibility to keep on top of the everyday stresses of life, because that's not going to change. Stress is always going to come into our lives. So what are those things? Little things that we're doing consistently day to day to help us complete the stress response cycle. And we call them wellbeing non-negotiables because, much as there's many things at work that are non-negotiable, we have to do them. So too is our health and our well-being. So if we can bring that mindset to how we are accountable day to day to ourselves, then that's going to build our resilience to that stress day to day. So we have an exercise where we get people to complete the sentence, I can cope with all that life throws at me so long as I, and we share, some guideposts really. So some quick ways to complete the stress response cycle. The first is movement, and it doesn't have to be a 60-minute, run. It could be just, some shoulder rolls or a 5-minute walk around the block. So movement is one. The breath, I've mentioned that, is another. Connection with others, talking things out. A problem shared is a problem halved. There's so much truth in that, and it is one of the most powerful ways. Connection is the opposite to loneliness. We know that loneliness is at epidemic levels, and for some people, the workplace is the only place that they have that sense of community and that sense of belonging. But other ways, you can, by creative expression. So, maybe you enjoy cooking or dancing or playing the guitar. These are all ways to complete your stress response cycle. Laughing, crying. That's an interesting one when we think about the workplace, because again, there's so much stigma around crying, and there were a couple of occasions, actually, it's worth just saying, in my career where the stress built and built and built, and my emotional snapping was tears, and I would sit with bosses who were like, I don't know what to do here, and be called emotional, which is not helpful. But that was my emotional snapping, because it was the final straw that broke the camel's back. So my non-negotiables, I mean, we ask people or invite people to come up with 3, but I've sort of got 4 or 5 really that I try to do every day. Movement is one. Nutrition, so I really think about what I'm putting in my body from and how I eat as well, and when I eat. I'm experimenting with lots of things around that. Getting out in daylight, out in nature or daylight really, and sleep, big one. I've really started to prioritize sleep, and the 5th is around that connection piece. How am I connecting and building my connections with Sean and Nikki, my co-founders, bless you, and my connection with my friends and my family. That's so important. And we do ask people to be quite specific about their wellbeing non-negotiables. So, do you know how much sleep you need? Are you going to bed, and getting up at a consistent time? So yes, by getting people to reflect on their wellbeing non-negotiables, we then are suggesting people take accountability. And when life gets busy, we often prioritize those things that we know are actually going to support us. So we might need to be flexible and go, okay, well, I can't go for a 60-minute walk today, but I can go for a 20-minute walk. I'm still getting out, I'm still getting the benefits. So it's taking accountability every day, little and often, being consistent. That's going to help us be more resilient to the everyday stresses of life.
I like that because you've personalised it, because I think there's lots of obviously advice out there, and we're sharing advice now, but you've done it in a way that's what's best for you, what helps de-stress you, what helps you see the light of day, all that sort of thing, whatever it may be. And I think it's personalising it. And that's what I think is really important here, rather than saying, here are 10 tips to beat burnout, here are 10 tips, whatever. And that they're all valid, and I'm not saying they're not, but actually, because they're so out there, we don't embrace them. But if this is something I do, I do cold water swimming, and it's a daily thing, or cold shower every day now, or I need to get outside. And so but I personalized it, and I think that's the important thing here, is to find strategies that work for you based on what you hear and see out there. I love this conversation, Sarah. Lots of insight. We could talk more about this. I think it's a really important topic, and helping employees and employers to get more well-being and sort of help with the whole sense of burnout. If people want to connect with you, get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, LinkedIn, really. Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm also on all the social channels. So Sarah Mayo, connect, and look forward to having a conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time today, Sarah.
Thank you, Julian.